Math. When you need help, you use Minute Math.
I'm Sean Gannon, and this is Minute Math. And today we're going to learn about adding and subtracting radical expressions. So if I wanted to simplify this problem, 3 square root of 6 minus 4 square root of 6. Okay? Well, since they're both, this was 3 times the square root of 6, or 3 square root of 6 minus 4 square root of 6's, we can just kind of subtract and keep the square root of 6 there. So 3 minus 4 is just a negative 1. So we have a negative, right? And then square root of 6. So this one's pretty simple. If you imagine square root of 6 is almost like an x, I know it's not, but if it was 3x minus 4x, it would be a negative x, it would be done. But it's not just a set variable, or a variable itself, it's a set value, but they're the same. So 3 times square root of 6 minus 4 square root of 6 is just a negative square root of 6. That's it. 3 times the square root of 7 plus 4 times the square root of 7. All right. Since both of them have a number multiplied by the same square root of 7, we can just add the numbers in front of the square root of 7. Negative 3 plus a 4, this is a positive 1. So a positive 1, square root of 7 stays coming down, and so it's just a square root of 7. And that's it. Pretty simple there, right? Negative 11 times the square root of 21 minus 11 times the square root of 21. Well, since they're both had the square root of 21 there, we can now just look straight at the coefficient in front of it. We have a negative 11. We kind of imagine the square root of 21s are gone. Negative 11 minus 11 is a negative 22. So we have a negative 22 here. And then we bring down the square root, because it was the same there. Bring down the square root, which is square root of just 21. And that's it. It's pretty simple when they have the same square root. So our final answer here is just a negative 22 times the square root of 21. Negative 9 times the square root of 15 plus 10 times the square root of 15. Okay. Well, since they both have a number multiplied by the square root of 15, we can look at the number in front of the square root of 15, the negative 9 and the 10. If we added those together, negative 9 and 10, we just have a 1. Okay? So if we write this, we just have 1 here, times, and we bring down the square root of 15. Okay? So if they have the same square root, we can do that. We have negative 9 plus a 10, it's just a 1 times square root of 15. 1 times square root of 15 is just square root of 15. Let's make it nice and neat there. And there we go. That's our final answer. Negative 10 times the square root of 7 plus 12 times the square root of 7. Okay. Well, since they both have the square root of 7 right there, okay, and the number in front that's multiplying by that square root of 7, we can look at the numbers up front and add them. Well, negative 10 plus 12 is just a positive 2. We have positive 2, and that's being multiplied by just the square roots that were next to it, square root of 7. And that's it. Pretty simple, pretty quick. Negative 10 plus 12 is 2, and so we have 2 square root of 7. That's our final answer. Negative 3 times the square root of 17 minus 4 times the square root of 17. Well, since we have a number times the square root, and that square root is the same for both of these, both parts there, we can look at the number in front of the square root. The negative 3 minus the 4. Well, what's negative 3 minus a 4? Negative 7. And then we just multiply that by the same square root that was for both of them, square root of 17. And that's it. Pretty quick, pretty easy, and that's our final answer. Negative 10 times the square root of 11 minus 11 times the square root of 11. Well, since both of these have the same square root of 11 right there, right? You multiply by some number, this one negative 10, this one negative 11. But since they're the same, we just look at the number in front of the square root of 11, and we add them together. So or subtract in this case. Negative 10 minus 11 is like adding a negative 11. So that comes out to be a negative 21. All right, negative 10 minus 11. Then we bring down the square root of 11 right there. And so that's it. Pretty simple. Is our final answer here is negative 21 times the square root of 11. Negative 2 times the square root of 3 plus 3 times the square root of 27. Well, look at this. Look at these. And since square root of 3 and square root of 27 are not the same, I can't just combine them right now. I have to make them become the same. So 27, or square root of 27, I can rewrite that. So we have 2 square root of 3 plus 3 times whatever's the square root here, right? But 27, I can rewrite that to be 9 times 3. So 9 times 3. Okay. Now what's great about this is that I want to see if I can get somehow 27 to look like the square root, or to look like 3, right? The square root of 3. Well, 9 times 3 can break apart, but now we know by our rules there that I can, well, since the square root of 9 times square root of 9 times 3 right there, I can, so this multiplication, I can separate that. So we have negative 2 times the square root of 3 plus 3 times the square root of 9 times the square root of 3. Okay? Well, now, that's pretty simple, right? Square root of 9, I know, is 3. So the next step here, negative 2 times the square root of 3 plus 3 times 3 times square root of 3. 3 times 3 is just a 9, right? So negative 2 times square root of 3 plus 9 times square root of 3. And so now it's pretty simple. We've converted this, all right? We adapted it to have the same square root right there. So we add the coefficients. Negative 2 plus 9 is positive 7. And then we can bring down just the square root. So we just have the square root of 3. And there we go. Our final answer here is 7 times the square root of 3. 2 times the square root of 6 minus 2 times the square root of 24. Okay. Well, right now we cannot combine it as it is. They don't have the same square roots being multiplied by a number in front. But square root of 24, I can adapt that to be 6 times 4. So we have 2 times the square root of 6 minus 2 times, or 4 times 6. Let's do it that way. 4 times 6. Okay? So the reason why I chose 4 times 6 is that I wanted to see if I can get the same square root here, the same square root of 6, because if they're the same, then we can combine them. Our rules of square roots and multiplication say I'm allowed to do this. Square root of 2 square root of 6 minus 2, and square root of 4 times square root of 6. All right, if they're multiplied on the inside, they can multiply outside the square root, or just have separated square roots like that. And what that allows me to do is to simplify this. Well, square root of 4 I know is 2. So we have 2 times the square root of 6 minus 2 times 2 times the square root of 6. Well, 2 times 2 is just 4, so we have 2 square root of 6 minus 4 square root of 6 there. And now that we have the same square root, we look to what's in front of the square root. We have 2 minus a 4. 2 minus 4 is just a negative 2. So we have negative 2 out there, and then we can combine it here and just have the square root of 6 to make it one part here. And so our final answer is just a negative 2 times the square root of 6. 2 square root of 6 plus 3 square root of 54. All right. They don't have the same square root base, so I need to adapt the 54, or square root of 54, specifically to see if I can somehow make it look like the square root of 6. So I'm going to rewrite this, 2 square root of 6 plus 3 times the square root, and 54, well, that's 6 times 9, or 9 times 6. So we have 9 times 6 there. And the goal is to see if I can get some 6 right there. Okay? Well, our square root laws allow me to break apart 9 and the 6. Oh. 6 there, I don't know, I'm getting ahead of myself. 6. Okay? I'm allowed to break it apart because the square root's over the 9 times the 6. I can break it apart to be square root of 9 times the square root of 6. So then from there, square root of 9, I can simplify to just be 3. So we have 2 square root of 6 plus 3 times 3 plus square root of 6. 3 times 3 is just 9. So we have 2 square root of 6 plus 9 times the square root of 6. Well, now that we have the same square root of 6 to both parts, we can add what's in front, 2 and the 9, add together to be 11. So we have 11, bring down just the square root of 6, and that's it. Final answer, 11 square root of 6. Negative square root of 12 plus 3 square root of 3. Well, what I want to do here is I want to see if I can get both of these to have a square root of 3. Luckily, I know 12 is the same thing as 4 times 3. So I'm going to take a negative here and write 4 times 3. So the square root of 4 times 3 instead of 12. All right? And now, since I did that, okay, I noticed I chose 4 times 3 instead of like 6 times 2 because I saw a 3 there and I wanted to get a 3 somewhere in that square root. So now I'm going to separate this. Negative square root of 4 times the square root of 3 plus 3 times square root of 3. We're allowed to separate here. If there's multiplication inside, we can separate and take the square root of each part individually. That works for us because square root of 4 is just a 2. So we have negative 2 out here times the square root of 3 plus 3 times the square root of 3. Well, now we have both the same square roots. That was our goal. So we look and we add what's in front. Negative 2 plus 3 is just a 1. Don't really need to write the 1. 1 times the square root of 3. And there we go. Our final answer here is just a simple square root of 3. 3 square root of 3 minus the square root of 27. Okay. Well, what I want to do is I have both of these have the square root of 3 in them, because the square root of 3 is there, but the square root of 27 is not. So I can break down 27 to be 9 times 3. So I have 3 square root of 3 minus the square root of 9 times 3 here. Okay. Since I have it as 9 times 3, I can break that apart to be 2 different square roots there. Okay, so we have 3 square root of 3 minus square root of 9 times the square root of 3. We're allowed to do that with multiplication. Just make sure both parts here have a square root. Square root of 9 is easy. That's just 3. So we have 3 square root of 3 minus 3 times the square root of 3. And so now we look at this and say, okay, since we have the same square root of 3, we look at the number out front and we subtract them. Right? 3 minus a 3 is just a 0. And we bring down the square root of 3, so we have 0 times the square root of 3. Well, what's 0 times anything? Just 0. So our final answer here is just 0. 3 square root of 8 plus 3 square root of 2. Well, I want to combine these two, but I can't until they have the same square root value. So 8 I can break down to be 4 times 2. So that's kind of the goal. See if I can get a 2 in there. So I have 3 square root of 8, or 8 becomes 4 times 2. I just rewrite the problem. That's not what I want to do. 4 times 2 there. All right, square root of 4 times 2 plus 3 times the square root of 2. Well, now that we have 4 times 2 inside the square root, I can break it apart and have both of them into their own individual square roots. So we have 3 square root of 4 times the square root of 2 plus 3 square root of 2. Well, that's nice here. Square root of 4 I know is just 2. So we have 3 times 2 times the square root of 2 plus 3 times the square root of 2. 3 times 2 simplifies to be a 6. So we have 6 square root of 2 plus 3 square root of 2. And now we have the same square root of 2 for both parts. And we have the numbers out in front. So we add those numbers together. It gives a 9. And we bring down the square root of 2. And there we go. Our final answer is just 9 times the square root of 2. Negative 3 times the square root of 6 plus 3 times the square root of 6. Well, if I had to combine these two together, I'm looking at their square roots. If they both have the same square root of 6, which they do, we look to the number that's out front. Negative 3 and positive 3. If we combine those two together, we get a 0. We bring down the square root of 6. Well, 0 times anything is just 0. So we have 0 here, and this one's a pretty short, quick one. It's just 0 as the final answer. Negative 3 times the square root of 20 minus the square root of 5. Well, my goal here is to see if I can get both of these to have the same square root. So square root of 5 can't really break down anywhere, but 20 can. So I'm going to see if I can make 20 have a 5 in it. Well, 4 times 5, right? So if negative 3, times the square root of 4 times 5. Then we have minus the square root of 5 right there. Well, now we have 4 times 5, being that 20. So multiplication inside of the square root, we can separate that. So we have negative 3 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. Multiplication there, minus the square root of 5. Okay. Well, we can simplify a little bit now. Square root of 4 is just a 2. So we have negative 3 times a 2 times the square root of 5 minus the square root of 5. Well, negative 3 times 2 is a negative 6. So we have a negative 6 square root of 5 here minus square root of 5. But now we have the same square root, so we look to the number that's in front of them. We have negative 6, and remember there's a 1 right there. So negative 6 minus a 1 is a negative 7. We then can just bring down the square root of 5, and there we go. Negative 7 times the square root of 5 is our final answer. 2 square root of 45 minus 2 times the square root of 5. Well, I want to see if I can get the square root of 45 to be somehow look like a square root of 5, and then I can combine them once that happens. Well, 45 I know is 9 times 5. So I'm going to break this apart to be 2 times the square root of 9 times 5 here, minus 2 times the square root of 5. Well, 9 times 5 can be broken apart to be 2 separate square roots because it's multiplication there. So we have 2 times the square root of 9 times the square root of 5 minus 2 square root of 5. Hopefully you can see how this is forming. Square root of 9 becomes a 3, so we have 2 times 3 times the square root of 5 minus 2 times the square root of 5. 2 times 3 becomes a 6, so we have 6 here times the square root of 5 minus 2 times the square root of 5. Well, now this is great because now they both have the square root of 5 right there. All right, so we look at the numbers out in front, which is a 6 and negative 2, or minus 2, 6 minus 2. Combining them gives me a 4. So 4 there, bring down the square root of 5, and there we go. Our final answer here is just 4 times the square root of 5. 3 times the square root of 18 minus 2 times the square root of 2. Okay? Well, what I want to look at here is say, okay, how can I make an 18 look like a 2? Because I can't simplify right now, but they both have the same square root. I could. Well, 18 I can break apart to be 9 times 2. So we have 3 square root of 9 times 2 minus 2 times the square root of 2. Well, since it's multiplication right here, I can break that apart again to be 3 times the square root of 9 times the square root of 2 minus 2 square root of 2. Square root of 9 is pretty easy. That's a 3, so we have 3 times 3 here times the square root of 2 minus 2 square root of 2. Well, 3 times 3 is just 9, so we have 9 here times the square root of 2 minus 2 square root of 2. So now we look, since we both have, or here, both the square root of 2 right there, we look to what's in front of it, and the 9 and the 2. 9 minus 2 is a 7, and then we can just bring down the square root of 2 to give me my final answer here of 7 square root of 2. Negative 3 times the square root of 18 plus 3 times the square root of 8 minus the square root of 24. Well, if I wanted to simplify this, okay, what I want to do is I want to break down each one of these square roots and see if I can pull it into like its simplest form, basically. Okay. Well, 18, I know that is 9 times 2, and I know the square root of 9 is 3, and I can simplify it that way. So I'm going to simplify this to be square root of 9 times 2, like that. Okay. The 8, I know I can break down to be 4 times 2. And the reason why I'm using 4 times 2 instead of like, it's not really 1, let's do 8 and 1, right? Is the square root of 4 becomes 2. So I'm trying to find numbers that I can take the square root of when I break it apart here. So I have square root of 4 times 2. And then minus the same thing here with 24. I'm trying to think, okay, what can I break this down? If I break it down in any two numbers, can one of them, I can easily take the square root of, and that's 4 and 6. So I have the square root of 4 times 6 there. Okay, so when I do this now, I know since it's multiplication between each one, I can separate that and have a square root each one individually and have multiplication separating them out. So we have negative 3 times the square root of 9 times the square root of 2 plus 3 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 2 minus the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. Okay. So now we can take the square roots of everything, right? That we can. That's nice and easy. So we have negative 3 times the square root of 9, which is 3, times the square root of 2. 3 times the square root of 4, which is 2, times the square root of 2. And then minus square root of 4, which is 2, times the square root of 6. Okay? Now square root of 6 can break down to be 2 times 3, but it really can't simplify anymore from there. So we're just going to leave it square root of 3 in simplest form there. Let's simplify some of these. Negative 3 times 3 is a negative 9 times the square root of 2. Plus 3 times 2 is a 6 times the square root of 2. And then minus 2 times the square root of 6. Okay? So now we have to add our like terms. Well, or not like terms, sorry, I thought it would work then. The ones we can combine is when the square roots are the same. Since we have the same square roots here, we can combine these two, and we look at their the numbers out in front of them. So negative 9 plus a 6 is a negative 3. And the square root of 2 comes down, so we're combining these two. But since this one has a square root of 6, there's nothing else that has that. We just leave it separate, minus 2 times the square root of 6, and that's it. We have our final answer here of negative 3 square root of 2 minus 2 times the square root of 6. 3 times the square root of 18 plus 3 times the square root of 12 plus 2 times the square root of 27. Well, if I wanted to simplify this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can break down each one of these square roots. Okay. Well, 18, and when I choose to break them down, I try to break them down to numbers that I know I can easily take the square root of. Okay, when I'm thinking about how I can break it down, because there's a lot of times many options here. Okay, so with 18, I know that's 9 times 2, and then the square root of 9 is just 3. So we're going to have 3 times the square root of 9 times 2 here. That's why I'm choosing 9. Plus 3 times the square root. Now 12 can break down to be a 4 times a 3, right? 4 times 3, which is nice about 4. 4 I can take the square root of evenly there. Okay? Now we have plus the square root of 27, or 2 times the square root of 27. 27 is 9 times 3, and I know I can take the square root of 9, so I have 9 times 3 there. Okay? So now I'm going to separate. I can separate the square roots with multiplication to 2 different separate square roots that are multiplied outside of the square root. So we have 3 times the square root of 9 times the square root of 2 plus 3 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 3 plus 2 times the square root of 9 times the square root of 3. So now from here, what we're going to do is simplify a little bit here. The square root of 9 becomes a 3, so we have 3 times the square root of 2 plus 3 times the square root of 4 being 2 and the square root of 3 plus 2 times the square root of 9, which is 3 times the square root of 3. So now let's go simplify some of this. 3 times 3 is that 9. So we have 9 square root of 2 plus 3 times 2 is 6 square root of 3 plus 2 times 3 is 6 again times the square root of 3. So now we can combine the square roots that have the same square root in a sense. So these two are both square root of 3, so we can combine those looking at the numbers out in front of them. The square root of 2 is the only ones where that has to stay separate. So we have 9 times the square root of 2 plus, now the 6 plus the 6 can come out to be a 12 square root of 3, and there we have it. Our final answer here is 9 square root of 2 plus 12 square root of 3. Negative 3 times the square root of 5 minus the square root of 6 minus the square root of 5. Okay. Well, normally first I try to see, can I break down any of these square roots? The only one I'm maybe thinking about is maybe the square root of 6. The square root of 6 is really, or 6 is just 2 times 3, right? It's the only really way I can break it down there, so that's times 1. Well, the square root of 2 and the square root of 3 don't really do anything. I can't like simplify that anymore, so square root of 6 is the most simplest form there. So after that, I'm like, okay, well, I see the square roots of 5, so I can combine them together. So we can either A, try to rearrange this, or B, try to do it from here. I'm going to rearrange it, so I'm going to bring the minus square root of 5 over here, so we have negative 3 square root of 5. Let's make it, if we make it with a plus and negative square root of 5 there, and then we have minus square root of 6 right there. Okay. So sometimes it's a little easier to see it as a plus and negative, so I brought this minus square root of 5 right here as plus and negative square root of 5. So now we have negative 3 square root of 5 plus negative square root of 5. Well, since they have the same square root of 5 there, we can combine the coefficient, well, not coefficients, the numbers out in front. Negative 1 right there, and negative 3 gives me negative 4. So we have negative 4 square root of 5 minus, bring down the square root of 6, and there we go. Our final answer here, negative 4 square root of 5 minus the square root of 6. Negative 3 times the square root of 2 plus 3 times the square root of 20 minus 3 times the square root of 8. Okay? Well, what I want to do here now is I'm going to try to simplify each one of these square roots to its most simplest form. Okay? And as part of that, I kind of look at the number in there, so like 20, I'm looking and say, okay, what two numbers multiply to be 20 if I break it down there, and which one can I take the square root of? That's the kind of goal when I'm looking at that. So negative 3 square root of 2, I can't really break down anymore, so that's negative 3 times the square root of 2 right there. The 3 comes out here. The square root of 20. Well, square root of 20, I know 20 can break down to 2 and 10, but neither one I can take the square root of. But I can take the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 times 5 is 20. So I'm going to break this apart to be 4 times 5. Okay? And the same thing with 8. 8 I can break down to be 4 times 2, or 2 times 4. And square root of 4, I know I can easily take the square root of, so I'm going to do square root of 4 times 2. And I put the one that I can take the square root of in front, the first one of the two numbers I'm being multiplying that. Simplifying here, well, this one I'm just leaving alone, negative 3 times the square root of 2. But here I can separate out the 4 times the 5. So 3 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to separate it. It's multiplication inside the square root. You can separate it, have the two square roots being multiplied. Minus 3 times the square root of 4. And the same thing here, square root of 2. Okay? Square root. So then, from here, we just go simplify the square roots that we can. So we have negative 3 square root of 2 plus 3 times square root of 4, which is 2, times the square root of 5, minus 3 times here square root of 4, which is 2, times the square root of 2. So now let's simplify this a little bit. The 3 times the 2 is a 6, so let's rewrite this again. Negative 3 square root of 2 is always by himself there. 3 times 2 is 6, times the square root of 5, and minus 3 times 2, which is 6, times the square root of 2. Okay, so now we're going to combine our like terms here. Okay, and so what I want to do, I'm going to combine my like terms. I have my negative 3 times the square root of 2, and then minus 6 square root of 2. These two, that's right, not like terms. They're the same square roots, not like terms. It's a bad word for that. Same square roots. Okay, so we have the same square roots right there. Okay, and I combine these two together. So I have negative 3. I look at the numbers out front. Negative 3 minus a 6 is a negative 9. So we have negative 9 times the square root of 2. Here. And then the square root of 5 is all by itself, so we have plus 6 square root of 5. And there we go. Our final answer here is negative 9 times the square root of 2 plus 6 times the square root of 5. Negative 3 times the square root of 3 minus the square root of 8 minus 3 times the square root of 3. But what I'm going to try to do here is I want to break down each one of my square roots as much as possible. The square root of 3 is I can't break down anymore, but I know the 8 I can. So let's rewrite this. Negative 3 square root of 3. And then minus the square root of 8. Square root of 8 I can break down, right? Well, 8 is 4 times 2. Okay, so I'm going to say this would be 4 times 2 instead of 8 on the inside. And the reason why I chose 4 and 2 is that I know I can take the square root of 4, and that just becomes 2. I know I can easily do that. So why not on this step here, let's go break it down a little more. Square root of 3 times, negative 3 times square root of 3 minus, and I can break this apart to be two different square roots. Negative square root of 4 times 2, square root of 2. And then minus 3 square root of 3 is just all by itself. So now let's simplify. Square root of 4 is just a 2. So we have square root of 3 minus 3 square root of 3 minus 2 times the square root of 2 minus 3 square root of 3. Okay. So now I have to combine my square roots that are the same. Okay. The two square roots that are the same are the square roots of 3's. And so I can combine those by looking at the numbers out front. Negative 3 and then a minus 3 right there. So negative 3 and the minus 3 is a minus 6. So we have minus 6 right there, square root of 3. But then the 2 square root of 2 has nothing else I can combine it to, so it's by itself. So we have minus 2 times the square root of 2, and there we go. Our final answer here is this negative 6 times the square root of 3 minus 2 times the square root of 2. Negative 2 times the square root of 20 plus 2 times the square root of 18 minus 2 times the square root of 5. Okay. Well, what I want to do here now is I'm going to try to break down each one of these square roots into its simplest form. So we have the negative 2 here, and the 20, I know I can break down to be 4 times 5. I know I can do 2 and 10, and 1 and 20, and, but 4 times 5, the reason why I'm choosing that is I know I can take the square root of 4. Excuse me, evenly, so we have 4 times 5 right there instead of 20. Now the square root of 18, I know I can break down to be 2 and 9, and we're 9 and 2, and because I know I can take the square root of 9, that's kind of my goal. So I have 9 times 2 right there instead of 18. Minus 2. Now square root of 5 cannot simplify anymore. So now let's go break it apart. Each one of these square roots that's multiplied inside the 4 times 5, I can break it apart to that square root to each one individually and multiply them afterwards. So we have minus 2 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 5 plus 2. Same thing here, square root of 9 times the square root of 2 minus 2 times the square root of 5. So now let's simplify this. Square root of 4 is just a 2, so we have minus 2 times a 2 times the square root of 5 plus 2 times square root of 9, which is 3, times the square root of 2 minus 2 square root of 5. All right. So now let's simplify a little more. Negative 2 times 2 is a minus 4, so we have minus 4 square root of 5. Plus 2 times 3 is 6 square root of 2. And then we just have a minus 2 square root of 5 over here. Okay. So now we can combine the ones that had the same square roots. Those are the square roots of 5. So we had a negative 4 square root of 5 and a minus 2 square root of 5. We looked at the negative 4 and the minus 2. That comes up to be negative 6. So we have a negative 6 here, square root of 5, plus 6 square root of 2. The square root of 2 is just by itself. There's nothing else to combine it. And so then our final answer here is just that negative 6 square root of 5 plus 6 square root of 2. 2 square root of 18 minus 2 square root of 12 plus 2 square root of 18. Okay? Well, this one I'm going to do a little different. Okay? I see I had a square root of 18s, right? I have two of them that have the same square root of 18 right there. So what I'm going to do actually is I know they have the same square root. I can combine them right away. So I have 2 and 2. I can combine those before I look the numbers out in front, and I have 4 square root of 18 here, minus 2 square root of 12. Okay. And then now what I'm going to do is simplify each one of my square roots. So I recognize this from the beginning as a quick thing that I can combine those instead of trying to break down each one's square roots individually right there. So I can combine them right here to be 1. Okay. So now let's go break down. 18 is just, well, that's 9 times 2. So we have 4 times the square root of 9 times 2. And I chose 9 times 2 because I knew I could take the square root of 9. Minus 2 times, and then 12 again is 4 times 3. 4 times 3. And I chose 4 because, or 4 times 3 because I knew I could take the square root of 4. Well, I can break each one individually. I have 4 square root of 9 times the square root of 2 here, minus 2 square root of 4 times the square root of 3. Well, square root of 9 is easy. That's 3. So we have 4 times 3 times the square root of 2 here. 2. Minus 2 times square root of 4, which is 2, times the square root of 3. So now let's go simplify a little more. 4 times 3 is my 12. So we have 12 square root of 2 minus 2 times 2 is 4. 4 square root of 3. And there we have it. Our final answer, 12 square root of 2 minus 4 square root of 3. Minus the square root of 45 plus 2 times the square root of 5 minus the square root of 20 minus 2 square root of 6. Okay? Well, what I want to do now is I want to try to simplify each one of these square roots as much as possible. And so when I do that, I'm looking at it, okay, what two numbers, like for example, this first one here, minus the square root of 45. 45 is 9 times 5. And the reason why I'm choosing 9 times 5 is I know I can take the square root of 9. So we have 9 times 5 here, plus 2 times the square root of 5. Square root of 5 can't simplify anymore. And the square root of 20, I know I can simplify to be 4 times 5, right? And again, I'm choosing 4 times 5 because I know I can take the square root of 4. And the square root of 6 really can't simplify it anymore. I know it's 2 times 3, but I can't take the square root of each one of those, 2 and 3. So we can leave the square root of 6 there. Okay? So now I can break this apart a little bit. The 9 and then the 5. The 9 times 5 can be minus square root of 9 times the square root of 5 outside the, let's see, for each one. Plus 2 square root of 5 here, minus square root of 4 times the square root of 5, minus 2 square root of 6. All right. So now what we can look at here, let's just simplify. Square root of 9 is just a 3, so we have minus 3 square root of 5 here, plus 2 square root of 5, minus square root of 4, which is 2, 2 square root of 5, minus 2 square root of 6. Now we're almost done. We look at the ones that have square root of 5, so there's 3 of them, right? So we can combine those. All right, so we look at square root of 5s, all 3 of them right here. We can combine them, and so we look the numbers out in front. Negative 3 plus a 2 minus a 2. Well, easy. 2 minus 2 is just 0. That negates it. So we just have the negative 3. So we have minus 3 square root of 5 here. And then we bring down the minus 2 square root of 6. There's nothing else with square root of 6 to combine it. And there we have it, our final answer. Negative 3 square root of 5 minus 2 square root of 6. 2 times the square root of 20 minus the square root of 20 plus 3 square root of 20 minus 2 square root of 45. Well, what I see here is I see 3 square roots right now that are all are square root of 20. I'm going to combine them first. Okay, so I look at the number that's up front. We have 2, a minus 1, and a plus 3. Okay, well, 2 minus 1 is a positive 1, plus 3 is a positive 4. So I'm going to put 4 here, 4 square root of 20, combining all three of these together, minus 2 square root of 45. Okay, and the reason why I'm doing this now instead of simplifying each one, each square root right now is I know I can combine them. It makes it easier. It makes me not to break down 3 of the same thing. Okay. Well, square root of 20, I can break that down. So 4 square root of 20 is, well, 20 is 4 times 5. And I choose 4 times 5 because I know I can take the square root of 4. Minus 2, same thing with 45. 45 is 9 times 5. And I'm doing that because I know I can take the square root of 9. Okay. So now, let's go simplify this a little more. With 4, the 4 times 5, I can break down to the square root of 4 times the square root of 5 like that. And the same thing with the 9 times 5, the square root of 9 times the square root of 5. Square root of 4 is 2, so we have 4 times 2 times the square root of 5 here, and 2 times the square root of 9, which is 3 times the square root of 5. Simplify a little bit more here. 4 times 2 is 8. We have 8 square root of 5 here, minus 2 times 3, which is 6, square root of 5. And look, I wrote an 8 there, but it's supposed to be a 5. Okay, be careful. Okay. Well, luckily here, we have square root of 5 and square root of 5. They're both the same, so we look at the numbers out in front, okay? And we can combine these two. 8 minus 6 is a 2, so we now have 2 square root of 5, and that is just my final answer. Negative 3 times the square root of 45 plus 2 times the square root of 12 plus 3 square root of 6 minus 3 square root of 20. Okay. Well, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to break down each one of these square roots. So, square root of 45. I know that's 9 times 5, but I choose 9 times 5 because I know I can take the square root of 9. Square root of 12, break down to be 4 times 3. Because square root of 4, I know I can take the square root of 4, so I'm choosing that 4 times 3 there, instead of like 2 times 6. Square root of 6, I can't simplify anymore. There's nothing really I can break down as 2 times 3, but I can't take the square root of 2 or 3 individually. Square root of 20, I know I can do it as 4 times 5. Okay, I choose 4 times 5 because I know I can take the square root of 4. So now let's go break this apart. Negative 3 times the square root of 9 times the square root of 5. I'm going to break apart each one of those to the square root of each one number individually. Same thing here. 4 times the square root of 3 plus 3 square root of 6 minus 3 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. Okay. Now from here I'm simplifying. Square root of 9 is just 3, so I have minus 3 times 3 plus the square root of 5 plus 2. Square root of 4 is a 2 times the square root of 3 plus 3 square root of 6 minus 3 times the square root of 4, which is 2, times the square root of 5. Simplify again. Negative 3 times 3 is a negative 9, so I have negative 9 square root of 5 plus 2 times 2 is a 4, square root of 3 plus 3 square root of 6, and then 3 times 2 is a 6, so minus 6 square root of 5. So now I want to look to see which ones I can combine. Well, I have a square root of 5 here and a square root of 5. Those are the only ones I see the same square roots, and I'm looking at them. Negative 9 minus a 6 right there comes out to be, negative 15. So we have a negative 15 here, square root of 5, plus, bring down the 4, 4 square root of 3, plus 3 square root of 6. And there we have it. Our final answer here is negative 15 square root of 5 plus 4 square root of 3 plus 3 square root of 6. Negative square root of 27 minus 3 square root of 45 minus the square root of 20 plus 2 square root of 45. Okay? So what I'm doing here is I'm going to see if I can simplify each one of these square roots. Okay? Now, let's see if we can break this down. So, the square root of 27, well, I know that's 9 times 3. Okay? And I know it's 9 times 3, and the reason why I'm choosing 9 times 3 here specifically is I know I can take the square root of 9. Now we have minus 3 square root of 45, again, is 9 times 5, and I choose that because I know I can take the square root of 9. Square root of 20 here is just 4 times 5, and I choose 4 times 5 because I know I can take the square root of 4. And we've already done the square root of 45, just being 9 times 5 here. Okay? So now we can separate each one of these to its own individual square roots. So we have minus square root of 9 times square root of 3 like this, minus 3 square root of 9 times square root of 5, minus square root of 4 times square root of 5, plus 2 square root of 9 times square root of 5. So now let's simplify which ones we can easily take the square root of. Square root of 9 is a 3, so I have minus 3 square root of 3 here, minus 3 times square root of 9 being 3, square root of 5, minus square root of 4 is 2, square root of 5, plus 2 times square root of 9, which is 3, square root of 5. So now let's simplify a little bit more, the 3 times 3 and the 2 times 3. So we have negative 3 square root of 3, let's just bring that down. 3 times 3 is 9, so we have minus 9 square root of 5 here, minus 2 square root of 5, plus 2 times 3 is 6, square root of 5. So now we want to combine all the ones with the same square roots of 5s here, and it's these three right here, square root of 5, square root of 5, square root of 5. So the minus 3, square root of 3 is all by itself because it's just sitting there. There's nothing else to combine it with. Then I have the square root of 5, so I look to the numbers out in front of them. A minus 9 minus a 2 is a minus 11, okay, minus 11, but plus a 6 comes out to be a minus 5. So we have a minus 5 here. Let's double check, yeah, minus 5, yeah. So minus 5 here, square root of 5, and we combine all of them together. And so my final answer here is negative 3 square root of 3 minus 5 square root of 5.
Minute math. When you need help, you use Minute Math. Minute math. When you need help, you use Minute Math. MinuteMathTutor.com.